And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Bruce. He is the CEO of BlockJoy, and we are here to talk about all things nodes and decentralization. A really important topic and one that I think is underappreciated by most of the people in Web3 who are not hosting infrastructure or validating blocks. Chris, how are you doing today, my friend?
Pretty good, Anthony. How about yourself?
I'm good. It's a big day today, the 6th of November. Everybody who is out in the Western world is probably looking at some other important activities that are going on today. But while that's all happening in the background, we're here with you. You're here with us. So thank you so much for joining the show. For those people who don't know you, Chris, could you give us your brief background and tell us a little bit about how you got into founding BlockJoy?
Absolutely. Yeah, so my name is Chris Bruce. I'm the founder and CEO of BlockJoy. This is actually my fifth venture-backed company. I've been around for a long time. I was actually on the founding team with Sean Fanning, who created Napster, probably one of the earliest decentralized applications out there. I went on to work at Helium, which was also initially just an IoT company, but used blockchain to really start the Depend movement, which has been fantastic. Helped them launch the product, came to Europe and launched it here as well. I've also founded a computer vision company, as well as a baby wearable that was acquired by Mattel. And we use a lot of big data. So I've been around a lot of big data. I've been around a lot of decentralized and distributed systems. So have a lot of experience. And I actually started programming when I was 9 and basically built internet websites in Web 0.1. So I'm familiar with bare metal, as they say.
A true webmaster in every sense of the word. Thank you so much for being with us, Chris. And for those people who don't know BlockJoy, tell us, what do you do? What are you about? What's the business? What's the focus?
Yeah, so BlockJoy offers a bespoke Web3 infrastructure that offers unmetered, dedicated, really fast AF nodes that our customers can run anywhere they want. They can run on our infrastructure, their own infrastructure. They can run it on a server in the garage. But what we do is we make it very accessible and very easy for anybody to run a blockchain node. And we hope that we'll get people off of the cloud, which is very centralized, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a few minutes, and get them to run their own nodes and contribute to the decentralization and the resilience of these networks that really depend on having distributed machines all over the world.
Which was the original vision, which is often given lip service in terms of the importance and the significance of Web3. But as we will get into, that may not be the case all of the time. Maybe let's do a quick 101 for people. Give us an introduction, Chris, to the importance of nodes. What are nodes? Why do they matter for blockchains, and how can they be supported today?
Sure, absolutely. So let's just use an example. So let's look at credit cards today. So credit cards are obviously debiting and keeping track of transactions. When you spend money, they're going to take that out of your bank account, or you're going to send a payment in. But they're keeping track essentially in a big giant database, and that database has to be very consistent. So if you take something out, they got to make sure that you're paying for something, but you're also getting a debit taken out. So it's a basically transactional database. That's what credit card companies are. But unlike what we see today, they are centralized. There's one company that owns all the data, one company that manages all the servers, and one company that kind of controls that. And unfortunately, we have Visa, we have MasterCard, we have Amex, we have all these sort of separate silos. Blockchains aren't very unsimilar to that. The benefit to blockchains is that they have developed, using cryptography, a mechanism for computers to actually agree without being controlled by one centralized entity, and that's consensus. And these machines are basically distributed databases. They keep track of a ledger, or they keep track of transactions. Think of it as if you could have your checkbook, verified by 20 different computers, and through a very clever algorithm, they can agree that when you wrote a check, that it should take that out of your bank account. And so, for lack of better terms, it's just a decentralized distributed database that keeps track of transactions. Now, they can be more sophisticated because, as we know, like Ethereum introduced smart contracts. So not only can they take money out of your account and give it to somebody else, but they can actually put some rules around that programmatically that happens without somebody looking at it. And so really, blockchains are just large distributed databases that do not have one centralized person controlling it. And as such, because there's not one centralized person controlling it, you might think, well, hey, if somebody is on the network and decides to like take my transaction and basically credit it to their account so they get the money instead of who the intended target was, how does that work? And that's, again, this consensus algorithm. And that's I think the big magic of Web3 is that we've come up with a mechanism to support this and to prevent bad actors while promoting a decentralized nature where not one person is in control.
There we go. So we have a system that is maintained by the many, not by an individual. We have nodes, which are those different modules on the network that are supporting the consistency of the records, the consensus of the records. And then we get into the rub, right? This show is called Middle Finger to the Cloud for a good reason. There is an issue currently, as you see it, with how nodes are hosted today, right? Blockchain is intended to be decentralized. It is intended to be managed in a way that cannot be censored, cannot be taken down, cannot be disrupted by single large entities or oligopolistic entities. However, what's the punchline here, Chris?
So, blockchain nodes are pretty hard to run, right? And they can be tricky for someone to manage. And because of that, what we find is that they basically end up on some cloud service by some RPC provider. So some big, well-known companies, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, their wallets, connect to this shared API that gets the data and gives you the balance of your wallet and a list of your transactions. And those are essentially running on AWS. They're running on Google. And you would think, oh, what's the big deal about that? But the problem is that having a good chunk of the network on one vendor could be problematic. So if we rewind a bit, if we rewind to back when FTX was at its height and just starting to crumble down, FTX was really heavily involved in Solana, and it made a lot of investments. It was promoting a lot of Solana projects. And when they started to tumble, what we saw on the network is we saw Solana, about 30% of all Solana validators immediately go offline. And what people started to worry about was, oh my God, they are basically unstaking. They have to go through a lockup period and they're all getting off because they see that Solana is going to crash. So all these validator operators are trying to get their tokens back, so maybe they perhaps can sell them before it completely crashes. And what we saw was Solana really just crash. It went from in the mid 100s all the way down to as low as 8 or even lower at some points. And that actually wasn't the problem. Wasn't that the validator operators were unstaking. What happened was a lot of them ran on a company in Germany called Hetzner, and Hetzner was very cheap, and they had these servers that people can use. And one day Hetzner woke up and said, "Hey, we don't want to support blockchains and crypto. We want that off our network." So instead of giving any warning or anything like that, they just shut them all off. And that's the problem, is that these networks really depend on resiliency and that decentralized nature of being able to run these nodes that are essentially the proof of your transaction history. They need to run in places where they can't just easily be turned off. And what I see is even Ethereum. When I looked at Ethereum a while ago, some 40 to 50%, maybe at one point as high as 60% of nodes were running on AWS infrastructure. And if you think about AWS is a U.S. company. They're very in tight with the government, obviously, because they do a lot of government work. And if one day the government says, "Hey, we don't want you to run crypto anymore," I think there's a good chance that they would be forced to turn that off. And so again, it's just it really can play a havoc on the network and could cause lots of problems. And that's not what we want. We don't want to see the key infrastructure consolidate under a centralized source. What we want to do is we want to see this key infrastructure be distributed and lots of different people run them on lots of different locations all throughout the world, because it becomes very difficult to shut down.
Absolutely. And so, the interesting thing about the Solana story is a kind of combination of things. Of that was a market signal suggesting that actually people were deserting the chain because they saw something negative happening. Also, there was a loss of service because those nodes were hosted on a cheap and ultimately switch offable cloud provider. In both those cases, though, the Solana blockchain still kept running, kept producing blocks. It's a case in that moment that actually just there are less validators. And in that moment, if there are fewer validators validating blocks, you might get congestion. You
Well,
might
not only
get
that, but
failure
yeah,
to produce blocks, but there's a bigger challenge there, right, with the
yeah,
security of the network.
that's
Which is, I
correct.
think, where
Yeah.
you're going.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it could open up to a 51% attack, as they say from Silicon Valley, but it can definitely open up to the fewer the number of validators that are running, and validators are the actual authorized nodes that validate the transactions and earn rewards. So you can think of them in modern terms as miners that don't use as much electricity. And so, yeah, that's the problem. The decentralized nature of a network really depends on how many validators there are, and the more validators, the less chance that somebody can take a majority ownership or control of those validators and then change the code to fit whatever they want. And the consensus mechanisms works by sort of a majority vote, and if you can lower the number of people that are required for majority and you can somehow get control of them, then you can take it over. Now, I think a project like Solana is pretty, they have quite a few validators, they're growing. It's 30% is probably not enough to make it, but it's still enough to really warrant attention. But something like, an Ethereum project or an L2 or an L1 that's relatively new, maybe they might have a lot of people running on cloud infrastructure where that could be much greater possibility, especially new projects that are coming out. A lot of, like, we helped Subsquid launch, and, hundreds and hundreds of nodes are running, and that's the time where something like this could be very tricky, could actually hurt the network right when it's coming out into mainnet. So what we'd like to see is, just distributed, and we all have heard that the UX of cryptos needs a lot of improvements, and the same for the infrastructure. And so that's a lot of what we've been working on.
Got you. And shout out Subsquid. Love the guys and wish them continued success. But as you said, the bootstrapping or the early phases of projects where they're trying to onboard validators, where they're trying to make it interesting, enticing, rewarding. I don't think there's a finite number of validators in the world, but certainly the attention of validators, the more chains there are, the more layer 2s that launch, the more layer 3s that launch. They're all requiring validators. They're all requiring people to contribute compute, to contribute their compute power to the network, their attention and their commitment, and in some cases capital, to be locked up in providing validation in exchange for rewards. The more fragmented the ecosystem gets, the more challenging, I guess, it becomes to bootstrap those validators. And so when you see projects that have 15, 16, 20 validators on the network, and you then go back to your Ethereum challenge saying, well, if half of those went down, or if 2/3 of those went down because they're all cloud-based, what does that say around the security or the protection of the network or the ability to generate or to attack consensus in that particular model? So it's not simple. Are we going to see, or do we need to see, a route back to non-cloud-based validators, non-cloud-based bare metal servers for running nodes? And how do we get there? What is the incentive for people to get there?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. Even in the Web2 space, we're seeing it. Geico is ditching the cloud now, going back to all on-prem. 37 Signals, which have Basecamp and Campfire, they're the inventors of Ruby on Rails, which is one of the most popular web frameworks in the Web2 days, and even today, it's still very popular. They're going to the cloud. They're going from the cloud to on-prem as well, and we see a lot of companies doing it. And even 37 Signals, they're going to save $2 million a year by running it themselves. I mean, that's $10 million in 5 years that they don't have to spend. And what we see is legacy applications and data being the most expensive thing to operate on the cloud. And if you think about it, what is blockchain? It's almost like a legacy application. It's not something that's built on cloud services. It is a binary that is running a large-scale database, and I mean large-scale database. I mean, we look at Solana, it's 450 terabytes of data. And so if you think about that on the cloud, okay, sure, the storage cost might not be that expensive. It's roughly $26 per terabyte per month, but it's the egress, it's the data coming out where the cloud really starts to get you. Now, for Web3, this is not a really good fit. For Web2, okay, it's maybe a better fit, but these cloud providers have been very aggressive, and I would say, even predatory in nature. And so, I've had several startups and I've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free credits to build on, one of these cloud providers, like whether it's Amazon or Google or Azure. And, when you're first starting out, okay, it sounds good. I don't have to worry about infrastructure. I could just build all my stuff with the web tools that they provide. It gets us up and running. But then what happens when you start to scale, then boom, the bills come in. And then you're realizing, holy crap, that's a lot more expensive. And then you kind of get locked in. You built on, some simple message framework, you built on RDS or some, proprietary version of Postgres. And then it gets very, very difficult to get off. And then you're hitting with egress fees. So the more successful you are, the more you have to pay. And, it just gets expensive when you scale. And so early on, it's good. Now, I think coming back today, what we're seeing is now we're seeing tools that are much better for running nodes and applications on bare metal. So all the tools the cloud providers have used have been kind of built in-house, or they're running on hyperscalers and VMs and things like that. But what we're starting to see is things like Docker and Kubernetes are making it so that you could run your own infrastructure. Now, the problem with Web3 is those are just strictly designed for Web2. They are never designed for Web3. They're very inefficient. They're very complicated. In fact, not only do you need some kind of certifications for every cloud vendor there is, but you also, need some kind of expertise to run Kubernetes, and can be very, very taxing. And so what we think for Web3 is like the infrastructure tools that are purposely built for Web3 are simpler to use, simpler to understand, and they address the problem much better. And so eliminating things like latency, the overhead of a bunch of virtual networking and virtual storage, which are just not efficient for these types of operations. And so that's how I think we're starting to see. I think enterprises are starting to wake up in the Web2 world and realize that, hey, the cloud isn't everything it used to be. The tools and stuff are much better, so we can bring it on-prem or in-house, or even a private cloud of our own. And then for Web3, I think people are realizing, shit, this stuff is expensive to run. And especially if build your business out of indexing, 100 chains and providing, some heavy data analytics, I mean, that gets really expensive because you have to query these APIs that are running on the cloud. So you're paying the egress fees, you're paying all this overhead to get the data out. And today you can run your own bare metal, unmetered, dedicated node that's going to be way faster than anything you get on the cloud because it doesn't use virtual machine, and you get no egress fees. You just get 100% of the bandwidth that if you pay for a 10 gig pipe, you can get as much of that 10 gigabits as you want, and it's just dedicated. You're not sharing it. So what we see in the space is people that are relying on cloud-based RPC providers end up getting really dinged when things are busy. Their response times get really slow and everything slows down. And so for them to have something that's oftentimes less than an RPC provider, but giving them, sometimes up to 100x of performance and throughput, I think it starts to make sense why people want to go back to bare metal.
Got it. So people are choosing to think a little bit more about the business case and the scalability case rather than just the simplicity or the ease of use. That kind of cloud scaling story as well. When you win, we win, or at least your costs are scalable. As you grow, it gets more expensive, but actually it doesn't have to be that way, or it doesn't have to be exponentially beneficial for the cloud providers. And won't somebody please think of the blockchain as a service providers who are hosting infrastructure for 50 different blockchains, doing all of the cloudification, but for the infrastructure side for blockchains, who are then probably having to have all of that running in the background. Either that, or they're really smart and they've got giant server farms, but then trying to manage that for 50 different blockchains with custom infrastructure probably isn't trivial.
I mean, they're still using, at best, they're using Kubernetes, which it's a pain point in themselves, but or they might be using Ansible, which is, kind of a scripting language. But the next rub is that every protocol behaves differently, and how you get that up and running. So every time they, want to integrate a new chain, they're creating some kind of new recipe for Ansible, or they're creating some sort of new configuration for Kubernetes, and it just really sucks, and it takes a long time. And even the big players, the BlockDaemons and Furas and all those of the world, who were the first sort of cloud-based RPC providers, they also take a really long time to integrate a new protocol because of the tools that they're using. And for us, what we did is we looked at this early on and said, hey, we should build a tool, something we call Babel, that lets you just configure in almost a very common language how to interact with that chain. And you create one configuration file. It's very simple, very easy, and then boom, now you can run this node on bare metal. It gets updates automatically. You get all the monitoring, everything that you need from 20 lines of a configuration file. And it's very simple, and it's in a language that you understand. You're not trying to assign, virtual IP ports and things like that, the things that don't matter. And the problem, I think, with the Web 2 tools is they're too general. They're designed to solve all these problems, and it's like they're a jack of all trades, but really a master at nothing. And I think having infrastructure that's purposely built for blockchains and really honed in on those particular needs and problems, then you get something that's easy to reason about, easy to operate, has a lot lower overhead, and at the end of the day, you're going to get far more performance out of it at a far less cost.
There we go. It's a simple story. While we're here, we didn't do it at the intro, but we will do it now. This is a LinkedIn Live. So for those watching, you know the drill. Give us your GMs. Let us know where you're coming in from. Let us know where in the world you are, whether you're on cloud, whether you're on-prem, however you're coming to us, give us a shout out. Please also do give us questions in the chat for Chris or myself as we go through this. Node infrastructure, super, super, super important topic. And we've already got a couple of questions coming in. So please do anything you want to know while we're live. Please do add it in the chat now, or put it in the comments and we'll try and get back to it later on. We'll go back to the comment section after the show. If there's residual questions or guys come back after the live, we'll try and get back to you on those questions. Chris, I do want to pick up a couple of questions that we have received as we've gone along here. One here from Rick. Shout out, Rick. Chris, what would be the impact today if AWS said they were not supporting blockchain business any longer?
I think it would be huge. So I think a lot of big players, Blockdaemon, Infura, Alchemy, a lot of them I know are trying to migrate off of the cloud, but a lot of their infrastructure is running on cloud and most likely on AWS. I think there's probably other companies like Coinbase probably uses it heavily, I would suspect, and maybe even some exchanges might use it as well. And so if today AWS has turned it off, I think we'd have a huge impact. I think markets could potentially crash because it would maybe send the wrong signals that the market is having problems. And B, I think that a lot of wallets and things like that would really degrade in performance and maybe even stop working. So I think it could be very problematic, to be honest. But I do think that we're seeing a big push even in Web3 to migrate off the cloud and get to bare metal. And it's not so much a decentralization story. I don't think most companies care about decentralization. It's really sad. I think they're just trying to make a better bottom line. And by going bare metal, they can really save the bottom line and eke more profits out, especially now that I think it's becoming very competitive in the Web3 space. So yeah, I think that's a big concern. I think it could cause a big disruption initially.
Just stopping short of blockchains stop working, because I don't think that's necessarily the case. But if we're talking about mainstream chains operating for decentralized applications that are being used by hundreds of thousands of users, maybe even one day millions of users, that hit in performance, that hit in the ability to process transactions is not going to be good for anybody. And then we've also got the decentralized applications themselves that they often have front ends, they have a web presence. Now, would Amazon turn off their services for web server type business? Probably not.
No,
but
I don't
for
think
node
so.
hosting, node management, you're going to see the front ends are probably going to persist. The back end experience, and like you said, the signal to the market, as we all know, the volatility of Web3 can be amplified largely by people's sentiment, how they see markets moving or not. We're less stable than we may see in this sort of S&P 500 type of businesses, but it's not the end of blockchain, but it's still not good.
Yeah, who would benefit would be the validators that weren't running on AWS, because now they would probably be validating far more transactions and getting much more rewards, to be honest.
There you go. And you've got to hope that they've got enough capacity to fill up or to manage through the rest. But thank you, Chris. Great question from you. Let's move on to the next one. So part of the solution is custom validator infrastructure. Chris, talk us through how you build that, right? You've talked about the problem. You've set out the scene. How do we address this? How are you as BlockJoy trying to approach custom validator infrastructure?
So it really started. So me and my co-founder, we both, he co-founded Helium. I was a part of Helium as well. We both had a bunch of tokens that we wanted to stake. So Helium was they ran, all the mining on the actual hotspots themselves. Over time, in popularity, they had to migrate that to a proof of stake system so they can get more powerful machines to validate the transactions. And so they went to a proof of stake model, and we had a bunch of tokens. And so we said, okay, well, we're going to stake our tokens. We'll build our infrastructure ourselves. And the Helium network, as an L1, is very challenging. It's written in Erlang, which you think is, they use it for telephone switches and stuff like that. But it's a bit problematic to run, high compute need transactions. And the way that they architected it, brilliant engineers behind Helium's L1. They are very, very smart. And so they built a lot of really great mechanisms in there to incentivize performance. So, you couldn't just throw some crappy compute out there and expect that you're going to get a lot of rewards. It really rewarded low network latency, high throughput and things like that. And so, we went like everybody else. Okay, let's just, look at Docker, Kubernetes. Let's look at, Amazon. So we started to look at all this stuff and we realized that, holy crap, this stuff is not, it is going to cost a ton of money on AWS. It's going to get expensive, especially because of the egress fees. And so once that network, launches, there's going to be data transferring. There's going to be new nodes coming online, where it's going to be syncing with yours. And so it's going to get really expensive. And then when we started to do some testing, we realized that, man, we're getting performance dings left and right for running on Docker and Kubernetes. And even Docker, Docker is usually efficient for web applications and things like that. But it could have like a 3 millisecond latency. And in this particular case, you would get penalized for that, especially if somebody was performing better. And so we set out, and so we started off with FreeBSD jails. So we said, okay, we're going to go to bare metal. We're going to jail it. It's very much like a C group in Linux. And all that means, it's just a way to compartmentalize applications on the thing without using virtual machines, essentially. And so we built this on FreeBSD. We built this on jails, and we launched the thing just to friends and family. We never intended to be a business about it. In fact, I was at my previous startup called Lumio doing computer vision stuff, really excited about what we're doing there. And then this thing just took off. What it did is we published how well our nodes performed, and it was very cheap. It was probably one of the least expensive on the entire network, and it just grew. It grew like wildfire, because when you look at the Explorer, you can see that all the at the time we call it StakeJoy, but at the time you could see that all of our nodes have the best ROI, and we were just getting new people, and it actually grew. And at some point we're operating over 51% of the Validator network. We're running on StakeJoy. So it was a little, and we just kind of woke up. I think when that happened, we woke up one day and said, why are people paying us? We are basically a cloud service. Like, we had our own servers. Why are people paying us to run this? Because it's too complicated for them to do it. And it really bugged us. And we wrote a blog post. We said, this is not what, decentralization Web3 is about. It's about running it yourself. It's about, being able to keep the network resilient and not have one entity control 51%. So we set out at that point to go and focus on building this out for other protocols. Helium was going to Solana, so they're migrating to become an L2. And we just looked at taking this technology that we started to build and all these tools that were very specific to Web3 infrastructure, and then port them and get them to operate on a bunch of other protocols. And so we really just started. We migrated to Linux. We use C groups and some other things like that. We built a management system that can actually check on the health of the node, can do upgrades of the node, let you remotely, start, stop, just give you full control. And we built that out over the last 2 years. We launched in May of this year. We did it like a soft launch. We had some beta users for quite some time, and then it's just been growing ever since. And we've just gotten a ton of sales from that, and getting feedback, and we're continuing to refine it and add some other features. But Helium is where it started. It was a very challenging chain to run, and performance mattered. And so we kind of cut our teeth on eliminating anything that cut into performance. And, by virtue of improving the performance, you actually improve the cost. Because if you can eke more performance per CPU out of the machine, you could run less CPUs, or you could run more CPUs and get even more performance. And so today, we don't offer like a shared API or anything. We just offer just unmetered dedicated nodes. It's for any company or developer that just says, hey, I want to be in control of my nodes. I want my wallet applications to hit, a node that I know is in our control and syncing with the network. And maybe we want to add some other code that runs alongside that, or maybe we want custom parameters to launch our node. Like, they get full control, so they can run multiple images. They can run even a fork of the node software if they want to do something that gets them more data out or whatever. And so, as far as I know, we're one of the few companies that allow you to have that complete flexibility over running a dedicated custom node, and at a price point that is like probably one of the most competitive in the landscape today.
Fascinating. So it started out of necessity, out of trying to eke extra performance. I was like, well, if we need it, maybe somebody else is going to need it. And I'd be amiss to ask, kind of, as you're looking at this. So obviously you've got kind of just traditional node infrastructure for running and maintaining blockchain networks, but we're starting to see in the current evolution of Web3, increasing use of technology like zero knowledge, increasing kind of popping up of prover networks, validator networks, multi-party computation, the trusted execution environments on hardware, if you want to go there, albeit that's a risky business depending on which hardware you use. As BlockJoy, or as somebody looking at infrastructure, do you see these as opportunities for what you're doing as well at the same time? Is that a different space of operation, or is this kind of actually, if we're into the business of eking out performance, these guys could use us too?
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, we support Polygon ZK now. We are implementing other things, and we're also look, like, what we can do could even extend beyond just Web3. But like render network, we can manage nodes with GPUs. It doesn't matter. Essentially, it's like building your own on-prem cloud, if you will. It's giving you the tools, and we could run nodes for you if you want. If you want to use, we don't even run our own hardware. We partner with data centers around the world, because again, we want that resiliency. We don't want to. I mean, we could probably make more money and lower costs if we just ran it ourselves, but that's not what we're intending to do.
Scale as well, if you need to move fast. And also, there's plenty of excess hardware out there that's probably underutilized. But they are delighted.
Yes.
Delighted. We talk about, I mean, I was at IBM back in the day, and their Z business, their on-prem business was actually going through a bit of a renovation. IBM had gone hard on cloud for years and years and years, and everyone was thinking, oh, well, on-prem's dead, bare metal servers is dead. Actually, no, they were doing some of their best business, and they're still talking about having, racks on racks on racks of infrastructure that's either running but underutilized, or just running and not utilized at all. And so in some way, you could think you're kind of contributing to the, dare I say it, sustainability of global infrastructure, at least the utilization of it. Let's call it that.
Yeah, for sure. And we see this in telecom, actually. I mean, two very ginormous international telecom companies we've spoken to, that's exactly what they want to do. They have all this excess compute, and they would like to figure out some way to maximize it and get a return on it. And so, some of them are actually running blockchain nodes as a service for companies. So I think there's lots of opportunity out there to use excess compute and to use it more efficiently. And like you said, I think there's a lot of bare metal data centers around the world that host web page, or kind of more for the geekier folks. But I think those guys are growing fast all of a sudden. They're having to order new servers and stuff, because again, I think there's just a huge push to go to bare metal. And Web3 really should operate on bare metal. It's too inefficient to not be as close to the operating system as possible.
And it's just not centralized, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a question coming in here from Maggie. Shout out, Maggie. Loving this conversation. Chris, how many node operators are there on a typical mainstream chain? That's a good one, because it varies, right?
It's very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult to tell, because not only do you have node operators, which would be people are just keeping a copy of the chain so that they can run applications on them and things like that. But you also have validators that run on it. And Ethereum, once they migrate to the new validator strategy, there's just, I think, thousands and thousands. And I think that they wanted to get to like 500,000 validators. So There's a lot. It depends on the chain. Solana is one that has quite a few validators, quite a few nodes running, because people need the data, and it's very fast, and so it's very difficult for them to get that from a shared resource. And every day, the thing is, there's new protocols being launched, and so there's just more and more demand. But yeah, thousands. I would say each chain has, and like Ethereum probably has, I don't know, I would say 20,000 nodes, maybe. I mean, it's just a guess, but at least 20,000 nodes. And then you have L2s that run on top of that. Yeah,
is to notice the layer one chains at the top that are contributing kind of main chain security. You want to see thousands. There's a research arm out of the University of Edinburgh that created the Edinburgh Decentralisation Index, which is designed to show for specific chains, or is designed to be a deterministic approach for understanding how decentralized is your chain based on a number of different factors. The number of validators in the network is one of them. Cardano has something in the order of 3,000 validators. Obviously, not all of those are being called upon all simultaneously to produce blocks, right? So not all validators are active all the time. Some validators maybe run on faster, more reliable infrastructure, are on and maintained more of the time, so they're more active. You'll see them in the validation pools more often. But what I think you were saying, Chris, is that the better chains, the more decentralized chains, you will see thousands of validators. You will also see some chains with small tens of validators as well. And that's not to say necessarily that's a bad thing, relatively speaking, but it does lower the security profile. It does increase the risk. It has a smaller number of nodes to attack potentially. Now, how that particular set of nodes is set up, how the consensus is set up for those nodes, again, some are more centralized than others. Some have managed all of the validators on the network themselves.
Yeah.
You even have private DLTs, private blockchains that are consortium chains from a number of parties who all host their own nodes on the network. There's no external participation at all. And I would be amiss to say that those have no value in the world. In some use cases, they do. Are they decentralized? Are they open? Are they hard to take down? Is there zero or low collusion risk? Not so much.
Yeah.
It's horses for courses, though. Decentralization is a spectrum, and every point on that spectrum, somebody will say, I'm okay here. This is enough for me. I don't need to be as big as Ethereum, but I don't need to be as risky as somewhere down the other end of the spectrum. It takes all sorts.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also up to the community. The community that is a part of that project really, I think, really has an impact on, how big and the number of validators there need to be and things like that. And so communities that are smaller and growing, hopefully they grow. And they've all grown over time. I think for me, it's what I'd like to see is that there isn't a requirement to get approved to run a validator. So sometimes in these L2s, like a lot of L2s are actually very centralized in control. Also, I'd like to see that there's not a cap on the number. So, if the market conditions warrant it, and you want to stake and you can earn the tokens that will, compensate you for the effort, then I would like to see that uncapped. And so I think Ethereum's done a really good job here. I think they've gone from a proof of work to a proof of stake. I think they've done it really well. I think the design of it is rather complex, but it's very resilient, very anti-attack prone. But I also think you brought up a very interesting thing, this Edinburgh index. For a while we've been looking at the a Nakamoto coefficient, and I don't think it's a great description. I think the one thing that is difficult and maybe not well indexed is collusion. So if you look at a lot of big chains, they have a lot of investors, and a lot of investors have a lot of tokens and actually can have quite a big impact on the governance of those chains and what kind of other chains they integrate with and things like this. And so I would love to see that as part of any kind of decentralization measurement. Would also be that what kind of level of collusion or potential collusion could there be from the early adopters. And I think the Bitcoins of the world and the Ethereums were so early that the amount of money they take is very limited, and the people that ended up getting a lot of control were actually active in the community and helped build the network and help run the network. And so the insiders weren't really somebody that bought their way in, it's somebody that kind of worked their way in. So I think those are good. But today it's very hard to launch a new chain without some kind of funding. I mean, I would love to see more things get bootstrapped, but it's very difficult. And I think that I was listening to your podcast with Devin on it about marketing, and it was very interesting because, the projects are as good as the community, and, it's hard to build a community and market in a place where it's so noisy. And if you look on Twitter, and I follow some people, but boy, there's a lot of noise, and it's a lot of like airdrop this, and it's unfortunate we're going through this area of crypto where it's a bit of a shill, it's a bit of a, speculation game, and the merits of Web3 and the consensus and what blockchains can provide, they're not good for every solution, but they're great for some solutions. And I feel like those merits aren't the forefront. It's the forefront of, the speculation and the get rich quick. And I hope that doesn't take away from the value that these can be on a societal level.
I'm with you 100%. Thank you for listening onto the show with Devin. One of my favorite people of all time, and definitely one of my gurus. When I find myself in moments of weakness and struggle, he's usually one of the first people I call. So shout out Devin.
I immediately reached out to him. Actually, I liked what he had to say, and I've been a big proponent of story, and even in film and stuff like that. So I was like, I think he gets it. So I pinged him. So we'll see if he responds.
There we go. Fingers crossed. I'll be pinging him after this to say, hey, you've got a new email. You need to go answer it straight away. And I think you're right. The bootstrapping process, and we're going through that with Midnight right now, it's challenging. But there are models now that make that a little bit easier. With Midnight, we're launching as a partner chain of Cardano, so we get shared security from the validators of the Cardano network from launch. So we don't have to go through that 1, 3, 5, 10, 15 validator story. We can go straight to 3,000. If we require it, there's a process and a phasing to these things, but that's a more secure way of bootstrapping. We don't want to go through a VC raise from the start because we believe that there's another way of involving the community, demonstrating the value and the power of the technology. And maybe you see us a little bit less on Twitter, or maybe we appear less visible, but then a lot of the effort and the energy turns towards the use cases, the community, actually making sure the technology is deployed in places where it can get used and amplified. And generally speaking, I believe those projects win out. You might see the noisier projects in the short term. You might see a significant amount of hype for 6 months or 12 months or for however long the treasury of those projects runs for. But if you don't have utility at the end of the day, even the best meme coins in the world, as exciting as they are for a short period of time that you're riding the roller coaster, broadly speaking, most of them are destined for zero. Because at some point, the interest, the liquidity, the attention span runs out, because that's what those projects are based on. If a project is based on hype rather than a business case, a P&L, then that hype will run out at some point because somebody will build a better mousetrap. Somebody will build a new version of something. And it's exciting at this point in time, seeing the different domains popping up, data protection and zero knowledge. It's a huge amount of projects now realizing the same thing that we have, which is for Web3 to scale, we need to have an ability for both private and public data to coexist with secure and deterministic compute in a decentralized way. Those are things that we want to have, we need to have. But there's going to be different flavors of even that too. And so that's going to be a journey for a little while. My hope is that fragmentation, though, doesn't allow us to lose the ability to actually implement meaningful applications at scale. I don't think it will, but like you've observed, I think it fragments the attention span. I don't say it muddies the waters, but you've got more messages, more stories, more promises, more one-liners saying this will transform this, that, or the other. And with that fragmentation, I think it's hard, but eventually the capital runs out and the fragmentation leads to consolidation, and we'll get back to the 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 chains or propositions that Web3 really needs. We probably just got to wait for a bull market to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's two recent things I think have had a good impact. And one, I think, is Depend. I think Depend is an opportunity for non-crypto enthusiasts to really understand how crypto can be valuable, because they could see it in a real world physical way. I mean, I think there's some Depend projects that maybe aren't so valuable, but like things like Helium, what they're doing with internet data and offloading it off of carrier networks and things like. I mean, it's such a compelling story, and the success of Helium was the fact that we were able to market and message to non-crypto people, non-IoT people, and say, hey, this is how this box works, and they get it. I just plug this in, it's going to share my internet, I'm going to get some tokens, and we're off. And we just did it in such a way. We never approached the brand, we never approached the marketing from a crypto standpoint. We never really approached it much from an IoT standpoint. We did for like the B2B side, we approached it from the IoT side, which made sense. But from a consumer standpoint, we just marketed it, we clarified the message, we really just showed what the value proposition right off the bat, and people got it. And so I think DPIN's a good example because people can see it in the physical world. I think DeFi and all these other things we know are very valuable. They're really important tools. I think we're also going to start to see this in compliance. So like shipping logs and trucking industry and things like that, and logistics. We'll probably start to see a lot of the compliance stuff go to a blockchain because we know it'll be immutable. The other thing I think a shift that I've seen too is that, because of all the regulations around ICOs or initial coin offerings, where you basically sell the tokens ahead of time, what we're seeing now is node sales. So I think the idea is that they pre-sell a license to run a validator. And I kind of have a love-hate with that because I think it's I think it is a little bit of dictating
a little bit, right?
Or
it's dictating with capital.
Yeah, but it's a step above ICO because you don't just have to have the capital, you actually have to then go run the node. And so in some ways, you're basically, outsourcing the operation of the network. And so I like that because it means that, I just don't buy and hold tokens. I now have tokens that are staked to this node, and I should do some with that node or I'm not going to earn anything. And I like that model. And for us, I think for something like our company BlockJoy, I think that's a really good thing. Says that's what we did with SubSquid. It's how do you get from the 10 nodes or 10 validators to thousands of validators? And what we did is we just integrated it with our tool. It's a one-click for somebody to go spin up a SubSquid node. I mean, literally one click. And we want to help that with other foundations that are launching nodes because, again, I think it gives more access to people to spin up a node and run the network. And there's a lot of community members too that are that are buying nodes. It's not just investors. And so I think to your point about being able to make it easier to bring a new chain up and get enough traction so that the Edinburgh index or Nakamoto coefficient is reasonable, making it easy to deploy and launch nodes. And oftentimes those early projects have pretty poor documentation, they're in flux, they're always updating. So it's very difficult for somebody even to manage it themselves in the cloud. So I think this is a benefit that, the software we developed can do to help people run those nodes. And the network can grow fast right out of the gate and super easy for all the node purchasers to run those nodes.
Super interesting. Again, Web3 continuing to innovate the ways to raise capital, to make capital effective, efficient, and to grow projects and communities. That's part of how we do it. And so that's another interesting one to see. So thanks, Chris, for the heads up. As we're coming to the end of the show, I wanted to ask the question around where do we go next? So we've talked about the basics of nodes, Web3's addiction to the cloud, why that's been a problem so far. Where do we go next? Clearly, you've identified that there's a good business case for the move away from cloud to bare metal that we're starting to see now, through projects like yourselves, being able to reuse existing infrastructure that exists around the world. We're starting to see the requirement for even additional compute in decentralized prover networks, decentralized verifier networks, et cetera, kind of layer 2 infrastructure above and beyond the main chain infrastructure. Maybe that's layer 2 infrastructure may not be the correct technical term for that, but we're seeing additional infrastructure requirements around supporting blockchain networks. Where do we go next? What does the next 12, 24 months look like for you, and where's the direction of travel?
Yeah, I think what I would like to see and what I think could just happen is I like to see what we're doing become more like DePIN. I'd like to see it be completely decentralized where the market is a free market for bare metal providers to run effectively, legacy applications on, so not just blockchain nodes, but could be anything. And, we have things like Pocket Network. We have, a bunch of different, decentralized RPC providers. And we have stuff that runs compute, like like internet computer and things like that are very complex and general purpose. But at the end of the day, I think the next sort of Amazon, I hope, is a decentralized Web3 protocol that says, hey, like, here are bare metal providers that are providing compute, and here are jobs that we want to run on it. And it's more tailored to that sort of distributed cloud type experience instead of some complicated, I don't know. I think with internet computer, I think it's a very ambitious project, but it's like everything's got a funky name and everything is just so non-domain language that we're used to. But I think long term that we'll start to see that, and it'll be a lower level thing, but it'll be in the language of the cloud domain and running jobs and running processes and servers and databases and things like that. But hopefully it'll be in a decentralized infrastructure where there is no middleman capitalizing on the market, and the market can be a much fairer place for people that want to run web applications and Web3 applications and things like that.
There we go. And as we've heard, the business case is relatively clear. The ability to spin up that infrastructure or to get access to that infrastructure in a relatively easy to consume way is getting easier. BlockJoy is one of the entities that's becoming the new Amazon or the new AWS that's kind of making it easy for people to run their own infrastructure, to move away from their addiction to cloud. And as a result, to have more control over their destiny, their costs, their profitability, and ultimately live up to the Web3 ethos. So shout to you, Chris. Shout to the BlockJoy team, a business that came out of necessity and is now creating something that actually Web3 desperately needs. So thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you for answering the community's questions. Have a brilliant rest of your week and stay safe out there.
Yeah, you too. Hey, thank you so much for having me on board. And to your audience, please keep building. Keep making Web3 an amazing, decentralized, application that's going to change the world.
Amen to that. See you soon, Chris.
Bye.